Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. Hi, it is Matt, and you listen to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. This week's episode is an interview with guitarist Ben Garnett, and we're chatting about his new record, Kite's Keep, which is extraordinary. I love it. It's a fascinating collection of instrumental, mostly trios, some quartets, with a fantastic band, which includes Brittany Haas on fiddle and Ethan Jodziewicz on bass. There's also a bit of additional guitar from Chris Eldridge. Darol Anger plays on a couple of tracks, and Kowert plays on a track. All favourite musicians of mine. It was a great, fun conversation to have, this one. We chatted about kind of Ben's background, playing a lot of rock guitar, and the sort of huge influence his cousin Andy Timmons had on him as a mentor in the early days. And then we talk a little bit about his transition to more acoustic string band stuff, how he met Chris Eldridge, who became kind of the second big mentor in his life, and how that led to this record. And it's fascinating. Depending on when you're listening to this episode, if you listen to it when it comes out, the record won't be out for a couple of weeks. There's links in the show notes where you can pre-order it and pre-save it and all of those things. If you're listening to it in October when the record is out, great, you can just go and listen to it. But I think it's fascinating. As you all know, I love a bit of progressive instrumental string band music, and this definitely fits that. And it feels like it definitely fits that, but it also feels like it takes the music somewhere else as well. So it was fascinating to chat about it. Ben also plays with Missy Raines and her band, and actually this intro I'm recording now is I'm in my hotel room in Chattanooga on my first morning at IBMA World of Bluegrass, and I will be able to go and see Ben play with Missy, which is going to be great fun. I'm looking forward to that. But that is it. Do check out the links in the show notes to find out more about Ben and the record, and pre-order it and pre-save it, or if it's out, just go and buy it. Ben also has a album launch tour coming up, so you'll find dates on his website, which is in the show notes. That is it. If you want to support Bluegrass Jam Along, you can do that through subscribing on Apple Podcasts for a tiny amount of money. You can also do it. There's a link to support the show in the show notes, and everywhere you'll find your podcasts where you can go and donate via Buy Me a Coffee. And if not, the most important thing really is if you will just share these episodes with people that you know love bluegrass. Most of the growth of this podcast has just come through people telling each other about it. And that is great. That is it. Here comes my interview with Ben Garnett. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Ben, welcome to Bluegrass Jam Along. It's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, Matt. Thank you so much.
I am really interested to talk about this record. It's called Kite's Keep, and it's out in October, isn't it?
That's right.
And I'm a big fan of instrumental string band music that is progressive in nature, and lots of people I've talked to on the podcast have fallen into that bracket. Many of them appear on this record, but this record feels different to me, and it also feels familiar, and I can't quite explain that, but there's something about these tunes that are like, each one's like a little short story that takes you somewhere and brings you back, and may go all sorts of places in the middle, and just the range of stuff. I'm fascinated to talk about it because it feels like a very different kind of record in some ways, and yet sounds very familiar.
Wow, thank you so much. That's great.
And I usually know where to start with these things, and there are so many things I could ask you about this, but I think what I'm going to ask you first is about kind of the nature of the collaboration on this, because with this kind of record, you can give people charts, you can teach them a tune and then let them wander. And there are 1,000,001 places in between. What is your approach like with something like this?
Yeah, well, I kind of let the piece decide that process in a lot of ways. I mean, I guess generally it tends to fall into where I will develop a chart, and then I'll have those available during the recording session, and then everyone will kind of have a common reference point to read during the session. And so we're all just kind of on the same page as far as where we are in the song and the arrangement and all that. But as far as the process for developing that and making that, at times it can come from just like, I have very specific parts in mind and I'll give it out sort of like a script, like giving actors a script. Other times I just have kind of a bare bones song, and I'll show the musicians the song, and then they offer their input, and then develop it from there. So I don't know. I guess to me, depending on the piece, you can get very different results depending on the process of developing these things. And I'm interested in how those different processes ultimately wind up affecting the music and affecting the output.
Well, and it's interesting because the records that fall roughly within this sort of spectrum of instrumental string band music, there are records like Baylor's Drive that feels like tunes, and you feel like you know what the tune is, and you feel like there's A parts and B parts, however many, and C parts and D parts and whatever. And this feels much more like little movies or pictures or something. There's a soundscapey element going on as well that steps outside of those kind of structures, to my ears at least. Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, in that, so that, I don't know. I think it was Paul Kowert said something to the effect of one thing he likes about playing my music is that it's not always tune driven at every moment. There's kind of these sections that are in the world of the temperament of the song, or are related in some way, but they're kind of extrapolations or ways to invite other ways of playing that are outside just the basic format of playing the tune. And I'm kind of interested too in improvisation is a really big part of what I am thinking about, and how to foster improvisation within a compositional framework. And so often I think these sections that develop are in some ways supposed to invite a certain kind of improvising within the composition. And I'm interested in kind of that experimentation of all the different ways you can achieve that.
Well, and the people you've picked to be on this record are very much kind of masterful improvisers, all of them.
Absolutely.
And no doubt that is why you picked them. And we'll maybe talk about the personnel a bit later because it's fascinating. But I was really intrigued by, and this sort of leans into what you were just saying there a little bit, but just a quote from the press materials that came with the record, and talking about, I'll quote a bit. It says, "My dream was to shine a light on these pervasive yet often overlooked abilities of the instrument, to demonstrate that a guitar record can actually showcase a guitar as this world-building ensemble instrument rather than merely a lead instrument." And it's that phrase, world-building ensemble instrument, I find that fascinating because it sort of speaks to that soundscapey, cinematic storytelling arc each of these pieces has. But it says something about your intent as an instrumentalist, because a guitar record can often sound like a guitar record.
Right. Yes.
And like you go, who made this record? And you go, well, this is definitely the guitarist's record. And this is not one of those.
Yeah. Well, I think, or at least my concept with that quote was to get at this idea that, historically the acoustic guitar has kind of been this instrument that builds a stage for other instruments to inhabit. Just all the great singer-songwriter records, and then many more. Those records wouldn't sound the way they do without, in my opinion, the specific styling of the acoustic guitar in that format. Joni Mitchell's Blue, or all the Tony Rice records. The acoustic guitar has a lot to do with just shaping the environment and how those records just ultimately sound, even if it's not playing the melody all the time. And so I guess, my idea is that, why not have an instrumental, what's in my mind like a proper acoustic guitar record that actually kind of celebrates that or tries to bring that idea a little bit more to the fore and kind of revel in that aesthetic that the guitar can really provide this world building atmosphere and stage for other things to then inhabit. And I think too, like the fact that a lot of the music is based around a trio, it's a fiddle bass guitar trio. There's just a lot of space and a lot of transparency for the guitar to really consume the entire picture. And it's a big challenge, but I enjoy that challenge.
Well, I was going to ask about that, particularly the trio element, because the last record, Imitation Fields, had sort of slightly fuller instrumentation mostly, didn't it? And it had banjo and it had, mandolin on there and some other stuff as well. But this feels very much like a slightly more conversational setup.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And was that sort of a conscious choice from the beginning? We'll be right back with you just after this. Bluegrass fans, don't miss your chance to visit the Collings Guitar Booth at IBMA World of Bluegrass, taking place for the first time in Chattanooga, Tennessee on September 16th through the 20th. Get hands-on with the latest Collings acoustic models, compare different voicing and tonal characters to find your fit, interact with the Collings team, and even jam with the many world-class Collings artists that frequent the show. You might even bump into me because I will be there visiting the Collings team while I'm at IBMA. Visit worldofbluegrass.org for more information.
I think so. Or just, trying to, in some ways, boil down a lot of the compositional ideas and things that I had going on my first record, but boil it down in just a slightly more practical setting. Because the idea with this too is that, I'm trying to take a band out on the road for the first time and trying to be a band leader, and just the simplicity of the trio it's always been appealing to me. And it also just feels kind of in touch with, just the history of guitar bands has kind of been in, largely trio formats. So whether it's, the great jazz guitar trios or like Stevie Ray Vaughan's trio, or I don't know, just like the power trio is definitely something that is seems historically something I'd like to be a part of, and so this is kind of my way of honoring that.
Well, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because particularly with the guitar, you can, and there are a couple of tracks on this record where there are two guitars, I think, but at least certainly, yeah. But in other contexts, you often get that thing where a guitar will be a rhythm guitar and another guitar will be a lead guitar, and when you've only got one, so and like Stevie Ray Vaughan's a great example, but also like Brian Setzer in the Stray Cats or whoever, if you are both the lead and the rhythm guitarist, you tend to get some slightly more melodic rhythm and some slightly more rhythmic lead, and it can be a fascinating little, because it's like you were talking about acoustic guitar as a kind of sound stage, and just those two, you mentioned Joni Mitchell and Tony Rice, and like the way they use a guitar is very different from each other. But then you look at like the way Paul Simon uses it, or Richard Thompson, or Nick Drake, or like, and so there's a myriad ways you can do that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I think there's something with, and it's also in the string band world, you think of a record like Skip Hop and Wobble or something like My Marshall's Big Trio, or I mean, though that is not a guitar record, but and some of the Agamaya stuff, those records he did with Mark O'Connor, and there's something about three voices that is more intricate and can sound fuller than two, but still leaves your ear space to follow each of them individually, whatever's going on.
Absolutely. Well, especially with, I don't know, there's something about, I guess, two basically monophonic instruments with bass and fiddle, and then having something like mandolin or, Russ Behrenberg playing guitar on Skip Hop and Wobble. I guess Jerry Douglas, kind of can essentially fill out things with him playing chords, but there's kind of a orchestral balance that's achieved in that. And that's sort of, I guess, goes back to my point about how I think that that space, I'm as a guitar player in a trio, I'm not competing with mandolin or banjo or kind of the other instruments that would be filling out the harmony or filling out the rest of the sound. And so it's, in a way I can kind of, at least in, the string band context, I can kind of imitate, some of the textures or things that a banjo might do or something that a mandolin might do. And I think the guitar, part of what makes the guitar so cool is that it can be this beautiful approximation of other instruments. And so that's something I'm also thinking about in just the development of the music and the orchestral considerations, I guess, ultimately.
Well, there's that. There's definitely texture is a word I wrote down in my notes when I was one of the first words that went on the sheet of notes for this interview was the word texture, because there's not just of individual instruments, but of the balance as well. So there's moments where it is a very clean, clear trio record where you hear the bass, you hear the fiddle, you hear the guitar, they beautiful interplay, like sounds like you'd imagine they would sound. And there are times where it does not. There are times where there's like, a kind of a willful changing of the sound of instruments, some with a bit of treatment on the sounds and some just with the way they're played, and this ability for, like, particularly a track like Cellar Door, where there's this, it's not even really a riff, it's just a slab of a groove where it feels like it's dropped in off a Soundgarden record or something. It's just, and all points in between, there's an amount of chaos on there. Yeah.
Totally. Well, I mean, that's just, I guess that, just trying to have fun and fully explore what the studio can offer as its own production kind of instrument, I suppose. But I think my main background actually is as an electric guitar player, and I didn't start playing acoustic music until I was much later in my teens and early 20s, and so that hybrid or that fusion is just something that I feel like is natural in my ear, and I feel like that I'm just kind of drawn to hearing what sounds could be under certain treatments, or and just expanding kind of the sonic palette of a typical acoustic band. But to me, I like the idea of the alchemy of an acoustic string band and the kind of just like life force you get when all the instruments are playing together in a certain way. And so kind of, I guess my aesthetic is about retaining that while also maybe adding various dimensions and augmentations into the music as well.
It's an interesting one. I tend to find when acoustic musicians use treated sound, it is like an extra thing. Rather than as an electric guitarist, you can rely on stuff a bit sometimes. And there's something beautiful about having to create your own dynamics and your own tone and your own timbre and whatever as an acoustic player. You can't really hide those things.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a big one.
So it'd be interesting to talk about your background a little bit then, because I'd sort of read that, you were an electric guitar player and that your cousin Andy was a bit of an influence and a mentor in the early days, who's obviously, played with some pretty heavy bands in his time.
Yep.
So what's that? How does that timeline sort of look then? How did you get into all that, and where did the transition come to sort of more acoustic?
Yeah, right. So I started playing guitar when I was 12, give or take, and it was all electric guitar. And my dad just, I think one day, said, you have this cousin who's a really great guitar player, and I haven't talked to him in a long time, and he just put out a new record, and we listened to it together, and it's just like, oh man, this is really good. And it was this album called Resolution. And actually, speaking of trios, that record in particular, Andy's whole concept with the Resolution record was to have it be this truly trio electric guitar album and no overdubs. One guitar track, one bass track, one drum track. And that was probably the most formative guitar at least in the early days, the most formative guitar record for me. I just remember hearing that and being immediately knocked out, and just like that kind of, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to sound like. And so, yeah. And then, when I was young, my dad kind of, I think, as an excuse just to reconnect with his family. And because Andy lived, I'm from the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas, and Andy lived about an hour north of us in a town called McKinney. And so we started driving up there and met with Andy, and I got to play with him, even though I hadn't been playing that long, but it was still a really wonderful and just totally formative experience. And yeah, just incredibly meaningful. And then I kind of got swept up in the jazz world. The University of North Texas was just again, about an hour north of where I'm from, in Arlington, Texas, in a small town called Denton. And I went to jazz school there. And again, mostly as an electric guitar player. And I guess it was around kind of like halfway through my time there. And, players like Julian Lage were pretty popular on campus, and the Punch Brothers had been putting out some of their bigger records at that point. Like, I think Phosphorescent Blues had just come out. And so I was peripherally just aware of that whole world and things happening in that. And, but then, I just got way more deep into Julian's world, into everything that he was doing. And then particularly this record called Avalon, which I'm sure you're familiar with, by Critter and Julian, came out. And that totally, in a similar way that Andy's Resolution album kind of changed things. I mean, that record absolutely changed things for me. And I don't know, it was just, this kind of synthesis of all these things that I didn't think could go together at that point or something, whether it's just, just really beautiful songs married with totally fearless, mind-blowing improvisation with like incredible technical facility, but just had this heart and soul quality to it that just felt really emotional, and it connected a lot of dots. And so yeah, between that and the Punch Brothers records I was listening to, and then there was Bela Fleck I got really into for a while, and then Grisman I discovered, and then that whole, so I kept like peeling the layers of the onion, I guess, and just got deeper and deeper and deeper, and then found some musicians in Dallas-Fort Worth to play. I wouldn't call it bluegrass, but it was adjacent. Actually, there's one really great. She's she comes from the Western swing world, and she's a great accordion player. And her and I played, a good deal of like fiddle tunes, and the kind of like mixed with Bob Wills' music and some of Django Reinhardt's music, and I just started playing a lot more acoustic guitar with her. And then I got invited to do this music camp in Savannah called the Acoustic Music Seminar, where Mike Marshall hosted it, and Julian was teaching, Bryan Sutton was teaching, Aoife O'Donovan was teaching, and that's kind of where I got to meet everybody. And that, I feel like going to that definitely solidified just okay, this is my path, the community of people where I feel like I can really access all the, I don't know, just the interests that I had at the time, and the confluence of inspirations in music that I've had up until that point felt like they were all possible in that world. And so, yeah, then the rest is history. I moved to Nashville in 2017 and joined Missy Raines' band, and that's when I started to play like a lot more serious bluegrass and string band music. And so, yeah, now we're here.
And was the kind of plan, if there was a plan as such, was it always going to be instrumental music? Was that always the thing that interested you most?
I think so. Yeah. Like, because Andy's music was all instrumental, and and I love vocal music, and vocal music has had a huge part of my just development or interests over the years. But I don't know. There's something that just feels so. I guess it feels natural to express myself as an instrumentalist rather than a songwriter or someone who merges poetry with music. Or I've tried to write songs, but don't feel competent or that good at it. But there's something. I don't know. Maybe if I tried it a little bit more, I could come up with something. But for some reason, there just seems to be kind of a disconnect there between trying to put together those two things. Whereas just writing instrumental music just feels natural and part of just my journey and evolution as a musician.
And it feels like once you got to Nashville that sort of Chris Eldridge became sort of the second big musical mentor in your
Hugely
journey.
So. Yep. Big time. Yeah. So I met Critter at that music camp in Savannah, the acoustic music seminar. And, we just kind of stayed in touch over the years and then moved to Nashville, and I knew he was here, and I think we played, there's these picking parties that happen every once in a while, and I think we jammed a couple times at one of those, and then I knew I wanted to make a solo record, and I was thinking like, gosh, should I ask somebody to produce it? I don't know. Can I just do this by myself? And as soon as I knew that he was in a phase of life of producing records, at that point, and then just had the thought of asking him to produce, and I was like, oh man, wouldn't that be amazing? And asked him to do it, and he agreed, and then kind of from there, became one of my closest friends and mentors, and just someone who has just really been a major guiding force in everything I'm doing.
And it feels like Imitation Fields was quite a long kind of process, like a year or two, to kind of get that from sort of the start of the conversation to being a finished thing.
Yeah, big time. Well, it started during COVID. I mean, it started before COVID. And, I think the initial intention was for it to be a shorter process. But I think, once we had recorded everything and then basically once we kind of got into the post-production stuff with trying to incorporate some electronic elements into the live string band, that's when COVID happened. And so I think it was a mixture of, just having the time to be able to work on all that stuff. And then, just for me, it was my first time exploring a lot of that, just what was possible and what actually would work in that realm. And it was kind of just this experimental place. And so you just wound up, like all great experiments do. They take time. So and
was Kite's Keep a sort of slightly more condensed process once you'd worked together on the first record? And
I would say Kite's Keep, it felt maybe in some ways a bit more intentional just from the get-go. But that said, I had been playing the songs on Kite's Keep with a live band just here in Nashville for about maybe a year and a half before we got into the studio. So in that time, there was definitely plenty of experimentation and, trying things out and what worked, what didn't work. But, they say, your first record takes however long, maybe a year, maybe 3 years, only for your second record to take 3 months, or something. So it's, and that's certainly true in my case.
It'd be really interesting at that sort of stage in the conversation to talk about personnel a little bit. Presumably the people you were playing these tunes live with were not the people who ended up playing them on the record largely, or were they? Was the band?
Sometimes, yeah. Actually, Brittany, Haas, and Ethan Jodziewicz and I did a number of trio gigs in Nashville, and yeah. So I would say the real like formative arrangements and just ideas came from playing the songs live with them. But yeah, but adding Darol, I really played with Darol much until that point. And then adding Critter to play some additional guitar on it was sort of a, just an extra thing that we hadn't been playing live or anything, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're going to go for a bunch of improvisers, though, I mean, two fiddle players, Darol and Brittany, that are seemingly endlessly, able to conjure up textures and sounds, and they both seem pretty limitless to me.
Yeah, it's insane. It's totally insane. And just how I don't know, the power of their interpretation, or I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but just the way they're able to take something that you give them. And you can give them a pretty specific, like I said, like in the earlier part of our conversations, giving them a specific kind of written thing. Even in the case of Brittany, there's one song, Sebastian's Garden, where we actually figured out bowings for her and Ethan to match on the kind of beginning exposition, so like down to the like exact choreography of how she would play it. But still undeniably sounds like her, and sounds like she's just adding all these things and giving it this life force, and it's amazing. It's why you get great musicians, I guess, is to have it be something much bigger and much just way beyond your concept of what something can be.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's people who've listened to this podcast quite a bit will have heard me say this before, but there's a lovely quote that personnel is personality.
Yes, exactly.
And that the people you choose, because you could have made this record with a different bunch of people and you would have presumably got a different record.
Yeah, hugely so. Big time. And
both of those two said there's a little selection of interview videos that came with the stuff that I got with this, and I love what Brittany said. She said that the experience was both interactive and specific, and that it felt like there was room to be yourself in it. Which is a lovely thing. And Darol just said, Ben's music feels like home to me. And it's crazy. Darol is musically at home in some pretty uncomfortable places. It's like to most of us.
Yeah. That's great.
So that's quite a thing.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, are you going to be able to go out and tour these songs with a band, and will it be the people who played on the record?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah. So I have an album release tour lined up in both October and November of this year. And the initial October run will not be with people that played on the album, although really, really amazing musicians that I think will render it beautifully. Ben Plotnick on fiddle for most of October, incredible fiddle player, known for his work with the Fretless, a really great string kind of crossover string band. Daniel Kimbrough on bass for first couple gigs, who's one of my favorite bass players. And Nate Sabat playing bass on the rest of those October dates, who's just fantastic. And then in November, Brittany will be joining me on fiddle, and Dan Klingsberg on bass, which Dan and I have played, I think, a handful of times, but never in a band setting. So that'll be fun. Looking forward to it.
How would you approach that then with different people playing the stuff? Once you reach this point when there is a record, do you give them that, or do you hope that they will sort of you give them the record rather than a bunch of charts at this stage?
Right. Well, I give them the record, and I do give them charts, but at this point the charts are essentially just transcriptions of what happened on the record, and so I always try to give kind of prerequisite, or just, just to say that this is what these people did on the album and with this music. But, obviously there's a lot of room to extrapolate and to interpret. And I hope you do that. And I hope you bring ideas to the table. And, the last thing I want is for us to play the exact notes on the page. I want it to be bigger than the sum of its parts. And, and I think that, just going off on that, there's a huge just art, I guess, in how, and this goes back to your initial question, I think, there's a huge art in how you communicate your ideas, or communicate your compositions, whether in written form or orally, and just, I guess ultimately, how much space you leave for interpretation, or what you do and don't share, as far as like, I don't know, like sometimes I'll be writing a chord chart. And I know, I kind of have like a voice thing or something that I'll play, but I specifically kind of don't notate all the notes that I'm playing in my guitar parts. I want that. I want that to be interpreted, because I feel like if I included every single like note in like an F major 7 chord that I was playing, then it would, I don't know, it might stifle someone's ability or desire to want to do something with that, or to expand on that. So I don't know. I guess I try to write as simply as I can with my written music, and I also try to write in a way that is open enough for other people to bring in ideas and to expand and expound on things that I've written.
And I think that's really true in a lot of spheres of life, like in kind of a work environment. If you're leading a team and you want them to do something, you can tell them everything you want them to do, or you can tell them what you want to achieve and let them work out how to deliver that to you. And different people respond better to different things. And the more you tell people exactly what you want, the more they're going to deliver what you want. And there may be a better version than what you started out wanting in the first. And there's so many ways that plays out in all sorts of creative contexts, and
absolutely
everyday communication.
Yep. Big time. I mean, to me, a lot of like film directors are kind of my heroes in that way. And like they, hearing people talk about how they'll work with actors to like come up with a scene, or, the lines that people should say, especially when actors fully inhabit their characters, they can think about their own trajectories and how the character moves, throughout the movie. And in some ways, the actors have a perspective that the director can't. And so if that dialogue is open, and if there's good communication between the actors and the director, the actors can bring so much to the table that the director maybe can't see or can't even imagine for themselves. So I think it's hugely important to have enough creative space, and just to create an environment where, I don't know, anything's possible. People can be themselves. Yeah,
well, I was watching, because it's been the 40th anniversary of all the Live Aid stuff recently, and I was watching a documentary about the making of the British Band-Aid single, and all these musicians just piling into a studio on a Sunday morning, kind of, and George Michael walks in and they give him a line to sing, and he sings it 2 or 3 times, and he goes, "Can I not sing it higher up, because it's just going to sound better?" And they went, do your thing, George. And George does it, and like, you can't imagine the record with it any different. Just,
right on.
Just this, it's moments like that.
Absolutely. Because I think people know what they're good at, or they know when they're, I don't know, when they're comfortable enough to really crush it. And and you just have to trust that.
And presumably in the studio for this, you're working with Chris Eldridge, who has worked with all of those people many times. And presumably part of his job as a producer is to foster that environment on your behalf while you're busy in the nuts and bolts of playing.
Big time. big time. Yeah.
Well, it is incredible. And presumably you are also still playing with Missy. Will you be out on tour with her as well?
Yeah. We have a couple dates for the rest of this year. I'm forgetting at the moment, but yes, definitely still playing with Missy, and her band is, alive as ever. And we just put out a record in, I guess it was February or March. Love and Trouble, and so it's just a really fun project to be a part of, and getting to learn just all these different real bluegrass guitar stylings and how to do that with a 5-piece band. And it's very, very different than my own thing, but it's a joy, and I love playing with those people.
Well, it's been a joy listening to this record. I sort of feel like sometimes when I interview people, I've got lots of questions about the actual music. And with this one, it feels like I'm going to need another year or so before I can ask those kinds of questions. So I've been really interested in sort of the process and as much of the why as the how. But it's been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful record. I love it. And I'm going to be diving in very deep over the coming months.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much.
And it's just been great chatting to you.
Yeah, likewise. I'm a huge fan of your podcast, and this has been awesome to get to chat with you.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.